Boards don't always need a well-known rock star chair. Sometimes, individuals who simply possess strong leadership qualities are more successful in the role. Welcome to BoardVision, the official podcast of the NACD, the National Association of Corporate Directors. We share perspectives from leading corporate directors and explore what makes boards effective, including how they can help companies prepare for the future. In this episode, Virginia Gambale, a board member and the chair of Nutanix, and NACD advisor Susan Paley explore the role of independent chairs. They discuss the difference between board leaders and other board members, the relationships to prioritize in the role, and the qualities of effective chairs. Have you heard about the benefits of NACD's certification program? Today's boards operate in a dynamic and rapidly evolving world. The National Association of Corporate Directors provides directorship certification that sets the standard for high-impact board directors. It's more than certification. This is the premier program, preparing directors to successfully navigate an increasingly complex business and governance landscape. NACD's directorship certification will enable you to demonstrate commitment, deliver confidently, and create real value for your organization. Learn more and apply today at nacdonline.org. And now, your host.
Virginia Gambale, welcome to the podcast. Hello, my friend.
Hello, Susan. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad you said yes to this podcast. The inner truth is that I've not sat in the chair seat. I'm really excited to unpack that with you in this half hour and help our listeners understand that in greater detail. First, I'd love to talk just for a minute to get to know your journey to your seat. And I'll note that you're one of a very small group of women who is chair of a publicly traded company. I want to first find out what led you to your leadership appointment or being selected for that and put in that role.
I can share with you that for this particular significant public chair role, I initially had an advisory role to a Silicon Valley founder, chair, CEO of about a $6 billion market cap company that, had gone public. And at a certain point, the company hit a plateau in its growth. And in my ongoing conversations with the founder CEO, I really probed about the board and asked, have you diversified the skill sets and experiences around your board? And he said, well, no, we actually still have, several years later, after the IPO, we still have several venture capitalists on our board who have actually exited out and several CFOs. And we haven't really diversified the skill sets around the board table. I said, well, that makes a lot of sense. And I would talk to him about, how to really begin to scale a company and why these diverse skill sets and experiences are essential in doing so. So eventually he asked me to join the board. And my first board meeting, in some ways, I almost felt like I was going to run in the other direction because the committees didn't have a committee structure. They spiraled down into very details, looking at pipeline, and so many topics were not discussed. So I really tried very hard to begin to educate my fellow board directors on what type of voices were needed around the table. And that started to get some really good traction. And it was about the time when the CEO was thinking, I'm a great creator, innovator. I don't think this scaling thing is going to be for me. So I ended up playing a role as a trusted advisor on the board to help transition the founder CEO out, to launch a search committee to find a new CEO for the company, and beginning to put some structure around creating a nom and gov committee that really would talk about what seats we need around the table. I then became the de facto nom and gov chair. Once that happened, it became very, very clear that certain of our board members were going to roll off and that our CEO and chair was exiting, and we would need an independent chair. And so I ended up being elected due to being the catalyst to drive a lot of this change so that the company could be prepared for its next chapter.
What a great story. So it sounds to me like you went from, I don't know if I would call it leading with your heart or your head, whatever it was, you were really acting from a place of intention, not maybe around getting a seat and getting a title, but let me advise and serve as some trusted counsel to this group that I believe in. And then you said, I was advising, then I was de facto, like you weren't even official nom and gov chair. And then you found yourself in the board chair seat. So it makes me wonder what elements of those activities, advising and lending structure and bringing in diverse voices, or what elements at all comprise what chair should be doing in their role that differs from the rest of the board itself?
First, I'd like to pick up on something you said, Susan, which is having this passion and believing in the company. I really believed that this company was ahead of where the market was now, but it was heading in that direction. And I was so passionate about the company. And having met many of people inside the company, I felt that it had such a great culture of innovation. And they actually had a 95 net promoter score with their customers. So for me, I really felt that I believed in this company, and it was so important for it to survive. There were experiences that I had, I think 3 in particular, throughout my history. First, when I was at one point a partner in a venture part of the business at Bankers Trust and Deutsche Bank Capital, I ended up running a portfolio, and I had to, a few times, take over as chair. And that is when I really sort of realized the importance of the role of a chair. And then when I was on the board of JetBlue for 15 years, I really observed our chair, who I thought was an excellent chair for the chapter that the company was at that point in time. But I also began to become a committee chair myself and really start to see what works, what doesn't work, and why this role is critical to the success of companies. And began to observe on many of my other boards, some that were failing and some that were succeeding, and what was sort of a common thread there. And it was around the qualities of a great chair.
Virginia, in television, that's what we call a tease when you go into the break. Right. So let's not dangle this in front of the audience. I'm curious then, what are those qualities? Where are the common threads? What do we need to know? You said, I learned what works and what doesn't work. So can you give us some great examples there?
First and foremost, I think assembling a great board, which has the voices of diverse skill sets and experiences, and directors who understand what the company does it at varying levels, but has a real affection or passion for this company to succeed in the marketplace and in society. That is essential. Then, as the leader of this board, ensuring that there's purposeful and focused discussion where all voices get heard, and try to minimize the concept of the loudest voice in the room, and to have effective discussions that leads to good decision making. And I, as chair, often also observed that the chair is a pretty powerful role. So weighing in last and being a great listener to hearing what your colleagues around the table think, see, have to say is so important, because you may walk into that room with a view, but sometimes listening to your colleagues talk and discuss moves your view. And it's important to be able to hear from those collective voices. I also think on the leadership side, making sure that you work closely with the CEO and the management team and your fellow directors to put in place a really strong agenda and materials that help elicit this type of good discussion. Some companies don't do this, but I think having a CEO closed session, asking the CEO to really discuss their fears, their concerns, their views on great opportunities, and then also being able to lead the closed session and independent session with your board directors. One final thing is, as the leader of this company, understanding the external environment, the landscape, and looking ahead and staying in touch and being able to talk to your shareholders. Those are all, I think, good, important skills that a chair must possess.
Obviously, you've given this thoughtful consideration and aren't winging it. And I can imagine that some of this list was composed out of seeing other activities across the board environments that you've been witness to and knowing what to do and what not to do. We get a great list when we experience that of what we'd like to emulate, change, reformat for ourselves, or just leave on the cutting room floor. But the list that you just plotted out for us, I found myself taking notes and realizing, oh, this doesn't just make a great chair. It also sounds like whatever someone's doing as a leader, it sounds wise to ensure all voices are heard, to ensure there's a passion of the people that you're working with for the success of the project, to make sure that your agenda leads to effective conversation. I mean, the list goes on of what I could retread for you that you just shared with us. And it sounds like it's universally great leadership.
I would say I agree with you there, Susan.
So when we think about those traits, I just love that you called them qualities and how important it is. Well, wondered, how does it differ then if I'm just a board member sitting across the table, maybe in terms of those qualities, but even more to the point about the responsibilities? What is the chair on the hook for that the rest of the board may not be?
When you walk into the boardroom as chair, everyone is sitting around the table waiting to hear how the chair wants to conduct this meeting and looks to the chair to resolve conflicts or when, conversations go into spirals, to make sure that the CEO is very in tune with what the board directors are thinking. Many board directors may think about these things, but they really are not able to drive them like a chair can drive.
It leads me to ask about the other position that we talk about in governance, which is the lead director role. What part does that play when we have a chair and a lead director?
This is a very, very important point because certainly if one has attended many NACD events, having an independent chair over the last couple of decades has become a pillar of good governance. Why? Because when the CEO also is chair, again, some of the things I mentioned, setting the agenda versus weighing in on the agenda, being able to set the strategic direction and alignment with the other members of the management team and the board is always a chair role. The lead director doesn't really step in and opine upon how to create strategic alignment. That falls squarely with both the chair and the CEO. So a lot of it has to do with the concept of leads versus guides. And we all know directors make decisions in context of the information they're fed. So if this separation between management and the board does not exist, there could be a bit of leading the horse to water, where the chair and CEO sees it so clearly in their mind, but loses a bit of the objectivity that an independent chair would have.
So interesting, especially when we think about the risks of asymmetric information.
Yeah, and there are some really interesting, examples. At one point, Microsoft was both chair and CEO, and they evolved to having an independent chair because they felt it was important. Apple has always had an independent chair in the last 2 decades. However, a company like JP Morgan has chair and CEO in one individual, but a very strong lead director. So it's interesting to see how companies are evolving in this space.
Is lead director a pathway to becoming a chair?
It could be. At one point, even in my own experience with this particular company, prior to the founder CEO leaving, a lot of suggestion was that I would become lead director. I was not lobbying to be the chair, so I was happy to say I would be the lead director. But I think I was lead director for literally 3 or 4 weeks, and then I ended up becoming chair. So I think it can be, yes.
That'll teach you to be immodest and humble and not put your hand up.
Right.
You did a beautiful job of outlining some of these roles and talking about leading versus guiding. I mean, great foundation for us to discuss the layers on top of that. We all know that more and more boards are less of I check in once a quarter and call it a day, and more of a bigger job and a higher level of responsibility as environment has advanced and evolved. What kind of time commitment is there for chair versus lead director versus director writ large? Can you speak a little bit about what that looks like?
Well, I can certainly attest to the fact that if you are a chair of a company that has a first-time CEO, that you are going to be spending a lot of time with that new CEO. Sometimes it could be until they are off and running, a weekly chat syncing up over a period of time that may change to twice a month, and over time, potentially twice a quarter or 3 times a quarter. As the chair of an experienced CEO company, I think there's still a lot of time commitment because there is so much happening in the world today that is moving so fast and so complicated, both from AI perspective, regulatory changes, and the impact of geopolitical, if you're a global company. And of course, cyber never dies, right, as an important topic. So being on top of how the external landscape is impacting your company's ability to continue to grow and evolve is an ongoing thing. And then being in touch with your fellow board directors, I feel, is super important. I always make a point to try to have, even if it's a 15, 20-minute conversation, one-on-one each quarter with every board director. Because when our board directors are engaged and passionate about the company, they too have lives outside and see what's going on in the world and have potentially great insights or concerns or things they would like to see as prioritized discussion.
When you've served on boards over your career, how often have you had that experience and been on the receiving end of a chair ensuring that they spoke with you regularly and all your colleagues in one-on-one discussions?
Yeah. I would say it's probably I've been on public boards for over 20 years. So I would say that it is probably a 25% experience, sadly so. Often I will, if I'm just a regular director, or oftentimes I'm chairing a committee, I try to reach out to the chair within the quarter if they don't reach out to me. Sometimes we have chairs who don't do that, but it is really important to know how your board is thinking before you walk into the room for your next board meeting.
And again, it's something that's applicable across so many different elements of our life. If you're working on a project, being in a silent silo doesn't usually help the project. We need to touch base with the person who might have hired us for the gig, or our boss or our colleague. It's healthy communication. So if you're a director on a board that Virginia Gambale is chairing, you're going to be maybe a little more in communication and have a little bit of a maybe slightly bigger time commitment because of that constant check-in, at least quarterly, not a big time commitment. How else might we think about the time commitment across directorship and then lead director role compared to chair?
Well, certainly as a chair, you can be 24/7. I mean, I oftentimes will have my best chats with my CEO over the weekend. And he's traveling globally, so the time zone changes. You got to get people when they're available to speak. As a lead director, I think it's probably a little less, and it depends on how well the lead director is received as an influencer on the board. So if there is this really receptive sentiment by the chair and CEO that the lead director is adding value and has a significant voice, then I think the time commitment is a little bit more than an average director, but may not be more than, let's say, an audit chair or comp committee chair. It depends on how that lead director's view is perceived by the chair and CEO.
Yeah, and also what's happening in the environment, whether there's a crisis moment. I'm imagining that there are times when a board member rises to the role of chair and is faced with figuring out how to be that leader, that driver, that guide, when they used to be peer among equals. I mean, is there a way that you can look back on your experience and think how you might advise someone sort of appropriately walks the balance of separating themselves or elevated, or they're stepping into that role versus being in a collegial group?
I'm going to answer it as I've observed through the many public companies I've been on the board of over this 20-year period. And I think what I have witnessed is leading up to the decision of the next chair coming from a board director, there's this, I could see that moment because that individual would begin to sort of put forth comments which really fall into the categories that I've defined as work that a chair does. So when that person steps into the role, I have felt, that makes sense. And the dynamic hasn't changed in any kind of quantum manner. It just is more and deeper engagement, but very comfortable. And don't forget, the people around the board table are the ones who elect the next chair. So they have to feel good about the person who's stepping into that role.
We talked about how you've parted ways with or taken a new path compared to some of the chairs you've experienced in the way that you communicate with directors and the traits that you're really conscious of bringing to it. Is there anything that surprised you, or was there an aha that you have now where you look back, you're like, oh, I didn't see that coming when I stepped into chair role?
I would say so. So when I was initially leading the Nom and Gov committee, and I knew we were going to have a change, I thought, okay, we need to find someone who could be a great chair for this company. Being in Silicon Valley, I thought, okay, I really need to find sort of that rock star, famous person who our CEO could learn from. And over time, my feelings about that really changed because I had been on some boards where I did have a rock star chair or a rock star board member who really just couldn't get off their yacht in Santorini or their ranch in Montana. As audit committee member one time, had to raise the red flag on the 4th of July to get a meeting going. And so I actually was surprised at how effective and how important the chair role is in all these other just pure leadership qualities, as you had mentioned. And that, yes, it's important to know what the company does, what the opportunities for success are, but all these other things are so important to driving a company's growth and success in the marketplace. All the things that I've mentioned, especially, having the right voices around the table and having leadership at the helm. So that was a real surprise to me. I can say that our market cap in 3.5 years grew from $6 billion to $22 billion as a chair. And it's all due to these things that I've talked about.
Just so much that you've learned and done in a way that's proven results. I mean, $6 billion to $22 billion doesn't lie. Is there anything that, given what you know now, that you might have done differently?
I knew you would ask me that question. And it really inspires a lot of thought on my part, because I do feel I did the right things at the right time. If anything, I think I would have been a little more personally confident. I mean, I had to be dragged into the role because it was my own personal voice saying, could I really be chair of this company? And I think that's one of the things that affects women leaders a lot. The concept of potential imposter syndrome, right? Or for so long, sitting on these public boards that are, oftentimes I'm the first female on these boards. You at sometimes get lulled into this, could I really be chair of this company? And so I think my own personal confidence level, I would have felt better about just taking it sooner rather than waiting a few months to do it. Or when they were pushing me to be lead director, I should have probably said, well, why not chair?
Oh, wow. I have a little bit of goosebumps. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. A couple of episodes ago here on our podcast, we did an entire conversation about imposter syndrome, and it's real. And it's not just gendered, but it comes back to relationships for the win. It leads me to think about, right? Yeah.
Oh, and I think everything I said about being an effective chair and having the relationships with your board directors is so essential. When important decisions have to be made or a crisis, you know that person well, and you know that you can just pick up the phone and talk to them at any time.
It also makes me think about the next level of relationship beyond the board. How does a chair decide who among the management team, particularly in the C-suite, if not deeper, they need to ensure they're building a relationship with? What's the payoff there for even having one? And how do they create a trusted relationship where they're supposed to?
It's a no-brainer for me to have a relationship with the general counsel, where the general counsel feels that they have a fiduciary responsibility, honestly, to the chair, the independent chair, as well as to the CEO. And understand that there are going to be times when a conversation has to be had, which is for the greater good of shareholders, not the management team, not their direct boss. So that's a really important relationship. I can tell you, when that isn't the perspective on the GC side, a chair struggles. The other relationships are interesting because as companies go through different chapters. Are they in a transformation? Are they in a high growth phase? Historically, I would say when you're in a high growth phase, also having a relationship with the CFO is very important, and the human capital person. Now, the rate of acceleration of pivoting, remodeling, retooling, these relationships, particularly with the CHRO, is so critical. And the head of strategy, in addition to the CEO.
You talked about having challenging and candid conversations for the sake of the enterprise. And it makes me think about how We had our last episode of this podcast about coaching the CEO, and I'm sure sometimes those tough conversations are critical. What about the reverse? How does a chair receive challenging or constructive feedback about themselves when they're always the top of the house?
I always want feedback because it's so important that the chair get it right or be moving in the right direction and conducting themselves for the greater good. So once a year, we have a board assessment process. We use an independent firm who knows us. So we use Wilson Sonsini, and we use a partner that helped take the company public, but is not in the day-to-day of the company. And when that assessment is being formulated, because every year, we tweak the questions, and so that we are in step with what needs to be done, the evolution of the company, the marketplace, etc. I specifically ask for feedback on the chair. And I get it. And I really appreciate that because it helps me to be a better chair. I think our individual assessor does a phenomenal job to really sort of cull out an individual versus a sort of a common theme. It's very, very helpful.
Asking for feedback about yourself sounds like another addition to your list of qualities of a chair. So when you reflect on the fullness of what you've experienced as a chair and thinking about the landscape across your colleagues, across the chairs that you know, what would you say maybe one of the most rewarding and one of the most challenging aspects of being in that seat?
I think the most rewarding is to see the growth and the value that gets created, as well as the brand and culture, because I can feel good about where we are, and especially keeping that customer net promoter score in the 90s, which is unheard of, is really a great feeling of accomplishment. What's challenging is making sure that you have the right management leadership in the company, and helping the CEO move through that journey is not easy. Because look, Susan, at the end of the day, it's all about the people.
Having just come off of the NACD Director Summit, there was so much discussion about AI. My head was spinning because the world will look remarkably different, not just when we get up Monday morning, but 52 Mondays from now in a year and 2 years. So the next generation of board chairs will be facing incredibly different circumstances. And I wonder if you have just a thought about how they will need to lead differently if you were to get your crystal ball out.
Obviously, we are seeing that the rate of change and evolution of business models and human capital models is rapidly evolving. And I think any chair leading any company today, and which is one of the reasons why I'm asked to speak about this topic, I am out there when I normally would not want to be a talking head. But I feel that inspiring the right type of perspective, both chairs and directors around the table, to help the company make it through to a rapidly remodeling, evolving company is the ability to be agile and pivot and continue to evolve. The cadence is becoming shorter and shorter and shorter.
Yeah.
And if you put your head in the sand, or you refuse or dig your heels in because you're afraid, those companies are going to get passed by and become irrelevant at some point. Now, this is not a total age-driven thing, because there are people who could be in their 50s, 60s, 70s and really understand what's happening. But I also think it's so important that our directors encourage the youth, these new grads coming out, to be part of our companies, to co-pilot for the future in a, not using the product co-pilot, right? Mm-hmm. But to be co-pilots, because right now, companies are not hiring graduates. And this is the greatest brain trust you could possibly have. And I have pointed examples of this, where I've seen young people come out of college, go in there, and completely like revamp a model for real estate development, or revamp the insurance sector and how it, should approach its consumers or assess risk. And we have to be able to do that. And so I think that any chair who is going to say, it's not here, we've got time, we need to move carefully, we need to assess what the return on investment is not good.
That ship has sailed. Again, when you just spoke, I heard the words have agility, be able to pivot, evolve. It all sounds, again, like I'll add to my list of not just great traits for a chair, but for leaders in general. It sounds like I should be doing that. Everyone should be doing that. So I love that your information aligns with what we know about outstanding leadership. And indeed, things are changing so rapidly. So for people listening who think that they will one day aspire to land in a board chair role, what one piece of advice might you hope they walk away with?
I would lead by saying, be sure that you want to be chair for the right reason, first and foremost, not just because you want to be a chair of a public company. And the path there is, I think, learning how to lead committees initially, and then building relationships with your fellow board directors. Again, Susan, anything you would say to a young aspiring leader in a company is begin to think that way and begin to communicate and express your views, your thoughts, your ideas in a way that would demonstrate your good quality leadership skills.
Amazing. I didn't know that this conversation would be twofold. It would give us great information about being a chair and also being just an amazing leader and moving through the world in that way. So I can't thank you enough, Virginia, for sharing your insights with us. Deeply appreciate it.
Oh, it's been a lot of fun, Susan. Thank you for having me.
That concludes this episode of BoardVision. We hope you enjoyed listening. Please subscribe and join us next time. Until then, visit nacdonline.org to stay informed about the latest resources NACD has to offer, such as memberships, certification, national or chapter events, and our content, including reports, articles, and Directorship Magazine. That's nacdonline.org. Thank you for listening.